Actually, combining two ideas, a little bit of a technological connection, you could have the drone be the scissor itself, where it just has like a little blade and it flies up above the wire and then just turns off and it uses gravity to like generate a lot of force.
And drone guillotines.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
What could go wrong?
Good Monday morning, creative critters. It's your boy Eugene Choi.
It's Jonathan.
And it's Michael.
And welcome to the Pample Pod, the show with candid conversations and creative chaos. As always, we're going to dive right into this week's topical and thought-provoking big question. And then we're going to dive right into our Thanks Mom segment after that. So the question I prepared for the three of us to explore this week is going to be, how does one, as entrepreneurs, separate their personal identity from the work that they do? So I think this is going to be a very interesting meta question, especially for entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs, our life circumvents around solving problems and creating products, but that's what we do day in and day out. And for a lot of people, they burn the midnight oil to try to make their dreams come true as entrepreneurs. So for some people, I guess they would find themselves kind of just be sitting and wondering, well, what's left of them? Do they have a life outside of their work? Should they be having a life outside of their work? So this is an interesting question. I'm very curious to hear what you two have to say about this.
Yeah, I think it's a great question to ask because ultimately work is what you spend the majority of your time doing. I mean, even if you're not an entrepreneur or you're not staying up late into the hours of the night, like working on a project, whether that be business related or engineering or artistic, there's many different avenues that people can follow their passion and work long hours. Mm-hmm. It is probably what you will spend the most time, besides potentially sleeping, in your entire life doing, like cumulatively, it's following your career and working.
Yeah, I was trying to do the math in my head. I think it's probably like a third sleep, a third work, and a third
everything
CBD.
Else.
Yeah. You see all those YouTube shorts of just reels of people like in those TV shows where they just wake up, they go to work, they go back to sleep, they wake up and they go to work and they go back to sleep, and just goes on like that. So it's like almost like some people might just look at that and just almost have like an existential crisis. But like, just to throw this question out there, are we as humans more than what we do on the job? It's like, because it's actually like what you're saying, Michael, and to your point, Jonathan, where a good portion of our waking hours, we're just working. We're not going out exploring the world or skydiving or doing other things that most people would perceive to be non-productive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess while we're talking about kind of what it means to do work and who you are outside of work, I think that the same like field of work can be conducted in many different ways. And all of those sort of approaches that you have to working can speak volumes to kind of who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. I think that, for example, even if you're like, whatever your job is, if you conduct yourself with like professionalism and compassion towards your coworkers, that looks very differently, even if you're doing the same job, to someone who like is more selfish or they're irritable or they're kind of like, don't really care about the work. So I think that even beyond like what you're doing or what your job title is, like pursuing either like excellence in service is for some jobs, like one of the best things to do. Other jobs require more innovative or lateral thinking. And in those cases, like the way you conduct yourself makes a huge difference in terms of what work means for you as a person.
Yeah, I tend to agree that like we're pretty multidimensional beings. And so I think work being just one of those dimensions, I don't necessarily quite agree with. I mean, to your point, your values are sort of who you are as a person. And I think, the not work, but the work you do on yourself is probably what matters more. And in terms of fulfillment, there's more than just work. I mean, there's also your role in life as a friend, a partner, a family member, other sort of functions you may have. So there are multiple aspects that come together to form a person. And to your kind of early point about entrepreneurs and sort of burning the midnight oil, I think a lot of times for entrepreneurs that have been successful, they typically have had multiple sort of identities or facets to their being that came together to form that entrepreneur personality, as opposed to just kind of like, diving in and then discovering themselves there. I think a lot of time it's because they've discovered those different aspects of themselves that they've managed to find a unique positioning, because they're like, hey, I've kind of seen a little bit of this piece of the world, a little bit of this piece, and I see a gap where we could bridge the two. And I think that happens quite a bit. So in that sense, I'm led to believe that it's, like you are more than your work for that, or even just, again, other facets of your life that hopefully don't go by the wayside. Because
I like that a lot. And I think that does definitely make a lot of sense as people who are trying to start their own business or create a product. They are trying this new thing, this new venture, because they've seen things in their lives, maybe from different areas in their lives, and they try to find that connection, like what you're saying, Michael. It makes a lot of sense. And I really like what you were saying, Jonathan, just earlier about the work you do doesn't define who you are than it is necessarily how you go about performing that job. Like you're saying, then you were talking about that, Michael, as well. So like trying to abstract the job itself with who you are as the person. I think that itself, it's
they're not necessarily the same thing,
right?
For sure.
Yeah.
That said, I think it would be kind of naive to deny that some jobs have either like a stronger positive, either societal or personal impact, whereas others maybe have like a overall negative impact on society. Of course, that's a function of how good you are at your job. You know, if you perform very poorly at an important job, you're probably causing like damage to society at large. But if you're performing really well at a bad job, then you're also like potentially causing damage to society.
Yeah, that's an important point too, because it's like also like good job is, or important job is like so relative as a notion too. But you know, I do agree there's kind of like I mean, your performance in that job does matter, but then there is that sort of just success being relative, right? It's like you'll have some jobs that have more accolades. You know, you'll see like billionaires, you know, that have all this sort of social media attention, but they probably couldn't change a tire to, you know, save their lives. But then you have a lot of frontline workers that, you know, change lives every day, but they just kind of go unnoticed. And at the same time, you also have, for example, terrible doctors, right? So it is kind of interesting. I don't know that it's the role itself that, so kind of, I think, agreeing with your point ultimately, it's not so much the type of role or the exact position you're in that creates that worth. It's more like your contribution to it and your mindset as you're contributing to that, I guess your performance.
And you're totally right that what is a important job or an impactful job is based entirely on circumstance and scarcity. For instance, like, you know, you could normally say like, oh, doctors are more impactful than mechanics. Someone might claim this, but if your car's broken down on the side of the road, having a doctor will not help you at all. In fact, it might save your life to have a mechanic if it's very cold or there's extreme weather.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because like, you know, you'll have like entrepreneurs, for example, and they might see as more bold and stuff like that. But it's like you also need, you know, people who can operate and execute with steady hands. And so to your point, there's kind of like a form meets function kind of argument there. And so, yeah, if your need is the mechanic, then like doctor's not going to help much. It's like that joke about, you know, is there a doctor on the plane and someone has a doctorate in philosophy or something? And you're like, okay, well, cool, but not relevant to this exact situation. And so it's kind of that situation.
No, I really like that example that you portrayed, the example mechanic versus the doctor. It really depends on the specific situation that you're dealing with, for sure. While you guys were just still bouncing those incredible points, my head was just thinking like, oh, if I were thinking about my own prior work experiences, for a brief stint in time back at school, I was working at our on-campus bookstore for a bit. So it's not like glamorous or anything, but still a job. And I was thinking, comparing that with someone like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or all these other people that have all the attention and all the success, where people are like, wow, these people fundamentally changed humanity and directed our course for something's evolution or something. And it's just like, just comparing the kind of job that I had, like you're saying, Michael, whereas there were people who maybe just ignored, or just, you know, people just go about doing their day-to-day, daily, mundane jobs. And then you have people out there, quote unquote, fundamentally changing the course of humanity. And just looking at those two comparisons together, it kind of just gets me like thinking, would certain people be fundamentally better than other people? Especially as entrepreneurs, it's very tempting to look at your team that you build and be like, this is my army, my grunts, my people to accomplish what I want to do. So I'm like the person in the ivory tower and being like, I'm going to tell them what to do and they will follow me. And then we're going to go and achieve whatever thing I have in mind. Whether that's healthy or not, you know, that's his own discussion. But I would imagine like, is that kind of like thinking just fundamentally incorrect or anything? Or what can we do about that?
I mean, rather than correct or incorrect, I think it depends how you define your terms and sort of your functions. So if better means richer, I mean, sure, then I guess being Bezos is...
The richer people are richer.
You win, or you're in the top players, I guess. But if it's about impact, I don't know that I would agree. Because, I mean, you know, Amazon's definitely had an impact on the world, but you can argue there's some positives and some negatives. And so depending on what you look at, you could argue it's a complete wash. You could argue it's more negative. You can argue maybe there's some positive and like a net positive. But to pick your bookstore, for example, I think of librarians because, it's kind of like people typically don't notice them necessarily, but they help people find jobs, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So what if as a librarian, you help someone find a job and then that person goes on to lead a nonprofit that does a lot of good in the world and saves thousands of people from hunger? I mean, you've definitely had an impact on the world then. And depending on where you fall in your consensus for, say, what Amazon did, you could argue that maybe your net benefit to humanity was higher than Amazon. So it kind of depends on, I guess, ultimately your values and where you derive them from and how you set up those definitions. So I don't necessarily, actually, I don't subscribe to the notion that is better because it is so relative. And so I don't know, if you're talking about doing good in general, I think everyone kind of has that potential to contribute at their level. If you're taking another stance on definition that's more about, say, winning or becoming rich and stuff like that, then there's definitely like some, cleaner ways, I guess, to count the lines. You just end up with a, if you say it's about being rich, then you just have an easier counting system, which is dollars, and then it's easier to draw that line. So I think people sometimes gravitate towards that because it is easier to count and know where you are. And
I think some people might connect that concept of being a better person, not necessarily to money, but rather to work ethic and to intelligence. So some people might say, well, look at these people. They're really rich. They've like led a company that says good things about them. Like it means they're motivated. It means they're intelligent. But I don't know if that's always necessarily the case. The people who rise to the top are the most qualified. I think that if you look probably statistically at hours worked, you'd probably find that the poorest people are the most motivated and the ones with the highest work ethic. Which would be kind of an interesting thing to look at. And I think even someone can be highly motivated, but they don't necessarily need to be a leader or an entrepreneur. They could use their intelligence and their motivation, and they're like, I'm gonna like find a cause and I'm gonna contribute what I have to this cause. And I may not be calling the shots, but they may be contributing in a very important way.
Yeah, I think that's where it's kind of a sort of murky situation, because you can also be motivated and highly inefficient. So I think it comes back to the values you were mentioning in the very beginning, where if you have that motivation and that drive and those values that allow you to act on that, and it's not just for show, for example, then you'll end up with someone who can have substantial contributions at their level, and even at their level can still mean life-changing outcomes for someone else. I don't know that Amazon, for example, has changed my life in like a life or death kind of ways, whereas some other people might have had that impact on my life. And so all that to say, there's definitely individuals that have had higher impact on my life than Amazon has, for example, just to keep picking on them for this episode. But I think it did come down to these people's motivations and ethics and what their drive was. And, that didn't stop them from, having that impact.
Yeah. And a neat takeaway to kind of generalize, I guess, what Jonathan and you, Michael, are saying is about the values. I forget who mentioned it, but one of you guys mentioned values just earlier. And I think fundamentally, if you were to compare someone that owns a bakery, like a cake bakery, versus someone who is in hard tech in Silicon Valley doing their own business too, I think it really does come down to what the individual values. And I think maybe part of what I'm going to call the quote unquote issue here would be we as a society kind of value certain things in life to be more important than others. So in this case, maybe it is money, like you mentioned, Michael. People who earn more money, maybe as the majority may perceive, people with more money may be more important, regardless of if that's true. It's just for some reason, where we are today, some people may value that and tie that to being a better person, but that bias may not actually be real.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much in the I guess the American mythos of rugged individualism of you claw your way to the top, and
the American dream.
You make a lot of money, then you deserve it, or you deserve the success, and that speaks to you as a person, So I think that perspective is flawed in a lot of ways, and some people who never rise to the top either in leadership roles or they kind of stay in a niche, like a cake baker who genuinely helps their clients. I think they should also, they also are worth celebrating. And just because you have influence doesn't mean that you're going to use it in a way that's productive or beneficial to humanity.
That's very true. Yeah.
I'd argue there's times where you feel down or highly unmotivated, and I've been way more motivated by a really good pastry or food than I ever have from these motivational videos from people who make, whatever sums allegedly. So it can go a long way. I mean, sometimes it is little things like that do contribute to, even just a piece of art inspiring someone to then go and create something else, right? it kind of has that butterfly effect, right? Of like running away and propagating.
Yeah. So to try to wrap up this segment nicely, try to find an answer to this question. How do you separate your personal identity from work? I think the first thing to preface would be, it has to be a lot of self work, working yourself. Look inside, look within to find what motivates you on a day-to-day basis, like what you two were talking about earlier. What are your values? Try to just identify you as a person, because something to kind of correct my beliefs just earlier in this recording is that when you try to separate your personal identity from work, that doesn't necessarily mean your identity has to be different from the work. It just means you recognize who you are as a person, whether that aligns with what you're doing with your job at the moment or not. It's separate, but like I think separating just means try to identify who you are as a person. So I think you two were sharing a lot of great points with that. But before we move on, I just wanted to ask if there were any other points or questions that I didn't ask and things you wanted to share.
No, I was going to kind of maybe jump on the point you just mentioned, where I think, people sometimes separate their work persona and personal. And I think that it's, to some extent, you may want to adjust, how you interact, right? Like just if it's more palatable or sort of more neutral, but that doesn't mean you have to adjust your values. I think that can stay across both personas. I think sometimes people feel like they need to change their values across both. I don't think that's necessarily a very healthy thing. I think you still hold the same value. You may want to change sometimes how you act or present depending on what you're doing, right? And even then, sometimes you can still merge the two. But at least as far as values go, I think it's okay to keep both constant across both personas. And that's where sometimes I'll see people split that and not necessarily be feeling very fulfilled. Because then for a third of your life, you are entertaining one facet only, as opposed to your true self, so to speak.
For sure. Well, in terms of true self, we're about to discover that with our next segment. Thanks, Mom, where we're going to be challenged with a random prompt by ChatGPT, and we will see what we could think of on the spot. None of this is scripted, and so let's see.
That is an exercise in our discovering our true selves.
That's a lot of self-discovery in this second segment. So,
and business idea discovery.
Exactly. Yeah. Without
Talk about multifaceted. Sorry.
No worries, for sure. Oh, and without further ado, let's jump right in. So the prompt for this week is going to be gravity scissors.
Gravity scissors.
Gravity scissors.
For some reason, I was expecting a fruits to pop up in this week's episode. I don't know why. I was like, banana something, please.
Gravity grapefruit.
Yeah. Pineapple anvils.
Oh, man. All the best ones are taken.
Yeah. Bummer.
So gravity scissors.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this one,
Cutting through the fabric of time.
That's certainly one way to go about it. You could also maybe tear materials.
I mean, wormholes would be a great fit for that nomenclature.
Using gravity.
I think just what you were saying, Jonathan, kind of got me thinking, where you just use the weight of something to rip apart certain things, where you just have something that's hanging, and maybe you clamp down something, and then you just, I don't know, for some reason, get like a rock or some really heavy thing to just hold down the end of one thing, and then the sheer weight of it shears off the fabric or whatever you're trying to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe you could use this sort of fits like the gravitational sort of fits like a physics or space theme. So maybe you could have a particle accelerator that cuts through a material by like just firing particles one at a time.
Yeah.
So sort of like a very high velocity sandblaster or water jet. But I just wonder what would be the advantage to justify the enormous cost of building a
I'm trying to think. I could see like an art installation with what you were saying. And you're pulling different fabrics, and it's just a non-repeatable process. And maybe there's some interesting.
It says a lot about society with ripping fabric.
Yeah, maybe it's a hot take on fast fashion. I don't know. Who are we to judge?
That's a good interpretation, actually.
Maybe there. But yeah, I mean,
Gravity
water jetting, or maybe using a laser to cut something. And I mean, I guess in a way,
I was trying to think.
You're pumping diodes, so I guess that you can maybe tie it back to quantum and gravity wells.
It could be a scissor that's actuated by gravity. So I suppose that would be a guillotine, but perhaps for like an industrial, like manufacturing use. Like I wonder if there's a advantage to like storing energy by raising an object and then using that object to cut something like as it falls.
I guess the guillotine is a great example.
We were beaten to gravity scissors by approximately 200 years.
The French were really good at it. I'm thinking of gravity as in like a grave situation, like maybe something that's important.
Serious.
And scissors is maybe cutting sunk cost almost. Like I wonder if it could be some app or some kind of decision making
To let you know when you're in too deep.
Yeah, basically like pull out. You gotta
Like
go.
when should you
When you're
abandon or like cut loose something that's like dragging you down.
Yeah.
Like it could almost be like, I don't know, an investment platform or something like that too, where it's like, no, you got to cut your losses now, and it's too grave.
No, that's really interesting. Like it's a system, a platform that helps you triage like the things you need to remove if you're a company that's like burning too much money and your runway is too short or something. Be like, okay, who are the people I need to lay off? What's the office I need to close down? And I don't know, something. It's definitely more not happy, but
It's your next AI advisor right there.
oh man, yeah.
Even personally, there's all sorts of situations people get into where they might be like overspending or overcommitting to a certain
Yeah. Oh, this just reminds me of those apps where it's like, hey, let's help you identify all the subscriptions you paid for but you're not using.
for sure.
Yeah, it's
It
like
reminds
getting
me
rid
of
of all
that too.
those additional costs that you're not using at all, and like enlarging your budget in a good way.
My mind was going more still gravity grave, but then actual scissors, like those sort of pneumatic jacks they have for firefighters to cut through a car when it's flipped over and need to extract someone.
Jaws of life.
Yeah, exactly. Like actual scissors for grave situations. Like I wonder if there's a...
I wonder if there's another circumstance where it's important to have
Yeah, exactly. Like
high
maybe a
power
portable
or
gun.
specialized scissors.
Yeah. Exactly. Like
Could you-
specialized scissors for situations like that.
Like, could you explain how those scissors work? This is the first time I'm hearing those jaws of
But just
life.
like a hydraulic press.
Yeah,
scissors.
like with well, I guess instead of pressing, you're kind of like separating or helping cut a hole so that if you go like through the roof of a car because the doors won't open, you need to extract someone. Essentially, kind of like a
It allows you to cut through the frame of a car.
Wow.
So, like basically you can wedge it in there and then rip it open.
Oh,
like a
okay.
real fancy tin can opener, but pneumatic. But make it pneumatic. So yeah, no, super useful. Saves a lot of lives and stuff. And so yeah, maybe there's some other application where there's grave situations.
Safety shears are used by EMTs. Those are scissors used in grave situations.
If you need to cut through closing, that might be tough. I mean, like if you have like a motorcycle and you have abrasion resistant material.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what they're for. So those already exist. I'm trying to think about other circumstances. Maybe a way to like cut potentially live wires without like a way that like cuts the wire but also prevents the ends from like touching other surfaces. So maybe some way to like
kind of keeps them secure and snug or something.
Yeah, if you need to like uninstall a power line, for example, and it's like live because maybe like upstream, like a pole fell over and you're trying to cut it off now. Sort of like specialized scissors that can both like clip it off, but also prevent the ends from like shorting on other things.
Yeah, maybe
That
like
would be a very interesting invention.
like a disaster scenario kind of.
Especially if it could be like remotely used. You either have it be part of like a drone or part of like a robot. So that way it's, no one's at risk and you can like cut some dangerous cables or maybe clamp off a pipe or like, that's.
I mean, now
what
on
I'm
a
thinking
drone, I
of.
think of like those DoD robots that go do bomb disposal. Essentially, I mean that's the ultimate scissor right there in a way.
Sure. Cut the red wire.
Yeah, it's a gravity scissor. It could be rebranding there.
Actually, combining two ideas, a little bit of a technological connection. You could have the drone be the scissor itself, where it just has like a little blade and it flies up above the wire and then just turns off and it uses gravity to like generate a lot of force. And cut through
Drone
the wire.
guillotines.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
What could go wrong?
Many things.
I really like the idea where you cut something, but then you also tie down the ends. I feel like that could be useful in so many things. Even something as silly as like arts and crafts, where you're cutting like threads, string. Like you can cut the piece, but sometimes the pieces might just fall like just go in any random direction. But like being able to tie it down.
It's probably would be like one of those crimper systems where you have like two clamps that push down and then you have a central wedge that like severs the cable. And that way, what you could maybe do is have them actuate independently. So that way you can like remove the wedge and then you have like both ends of the cable are now disconnected electrically, but they're not going to like fall over. Especially if you had, this would be a very advanced, more advanced concept, but if you had like a drone that has maybe, that's sort of like two drones glued together at the middle where they can each cut the cable and then they can fly off in separate directions. So you can like, still thinking back to a scenario where maybe you're like cutting a power line. You can like then bring the two ends away from each other and move them to separate locations.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like the sort of like the use case or like the need for it. Because I imagine on a standard operation, if you can cut the power to that pole, for example, you do that first. But maybe disaster response where you don't have access to that other
sort of circumstance I was thinking
point.
of.
Yeah, I could see that being maybe more of a the use case for that specifically. Yeah,
where you're not able to turn something off.
Yeah, you just don't have access because there's like ruins all around it, or some fires preventing you from shutting it off, and you need to act pretty fast or something. We couldn't deliver your Amazon package, so we're
here's
just
another
gonna
scenario in which it would be useful: cutting dead branches off of trees.
Oh yeah,
Because you have problems where, like, you know, as the branches fall, like, it obviously endangers people below. But if you instead had some sort of like safety, some sort of like specialized scissor that both like cuts the branch but also grips the end of it so it doesn't fall down immediately. And instead you could either retract it or just place it down.
has a little hook on it, lowers it gently or something.
Yeah. So like instead of a clamp, it's just like a noose or like just some sort of like cable that clamps onto it, and then you can lower it down through a pulley or something.
Yeah.
So I guess it'd be a large pole, and then you have a cable running up the pole, then you have a pulley up by the blade, and then it has some sort of mechanism that allows it to clamp onto the branch, and then you can just run the line down.
Yeah, that could be a little safer
could
too.
definitely be
especially if
safer.
you're, like here with power lines and all over the place as you're cutting
and you need
things.
to be precise. Because I've definitely seen like my parents sometimes go out to like the yard and like cut down tree branches, and they'll be like falling, and sometimes they'll knock out other branches. And
I've known people who got injured like trying to cut branches
For
and
sure.
falling from ladders and stuff like that too. So.
yeah,
And you have like those I'm drawing a blank now. It's all like on a long pole where you have the cutter at
exactly.
the end
That's what I'm
activated by
thinking of.
cable.
It's almost like a scythe, but with a really long handle.
I forget the name of it, but yeah, the branch can still fall on you once you're
Absolutely,
cutting it.
yeah. You just have to kind of hope it doesn't.
Yeah, no, that could, or in tall forests, we have like really big trees for like forest clearings and stuff like that too. So, you know, if you've seen those videos of people like chainsawing, like attached to the tree while chainsawing those branches and stuff, you know, it's a pretty interesting process. So.
For sure, that's one potential idea where these gravity scissors. Yeah, I think it fits very well with the theme as well, because you're using the scissors and then you're like fighting gravity somehow by either like holding it up or slowly lowering it down.
Yeah, still like the wormholes though.
That certainly would be cool.
It's cutting the fabric of time and space
while hanging from a tree.
while throwing trees at it.
Yeah. So I have another idea where you have scissors, but the blades themselves are actually just magnetic. So like it's almost as if they're inducing their own quote unquote gravity field with things attracting towards the scissors. Kind of like how you have screwdrivers with that magnetic tip. Those are always super helpful. But I wonder if there is a use case where, and this is probably a thing that people already created, but just scissors that just have magnetic blades. And I feel like this would just be called magnetic scissors, but just trying to mend the common perception of magnetism being like almost like gravity.
What's the advantage of the magnetism? Is it?
Well, I was thinking just like going back to us cutting things, even just like if there's a use case where you need to cut multiple wires, and then like, I don't know, if the wires are like magnetic or something, they could just stick to the scissors rather than just like falling down or getting all disarrayed, getting messy and everything. I don't know. I was trying to join the idea of using scissors with like nuts and bolts, but I'm like, I don't think a scissor would be used for that. But just the idea of using scissors to try to attract things, maybe when in the middle of cutting something, is something I'm trying to figure out in my head. It might just not be a good idea, but
if it's like a metaphorical scissor, I think I could kind of see it where maybe I don't know if it's necessarily magnetic, but you may thinking like a bio, for example, or maybe in some applications, if you're able to orient either the material or that molecule in the way, and then at a microscopic level, you're essentially a scissor, you're cutting it. I guess it could be a knife, not necessarily a scissor, but if it allows you to hold a certain orientation of an object to give a precise cut across a structure, I could kind of see that as like a magnetic scissor, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think definitely it would be at the level of like trying to utilize and control like proteins to be going around, and they would be the ones going around cutting organelles and stuff. Yeah. If I were more of a bioengineer, I might have more input on that, but that might be something.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like cutting really tiny things can be, pretty challenging. So you need to kind of find a way to hold it in place and hold it in orientation.
Yeah, it's got such little inertia. I think get blown around by, like, if you've ever tried to like do an arts and crafts project where you're trying to cut a very small piece of paper with an X-Acto knife, it'll like slide around and the breeze will push it away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think we've covered most combinations. We got metaphorical scissor, real gravity, metaphorical gravity, real scissor, metaphorical both.
Practical examples of like the tree.
Yeah. And I think real gravity, real scissor, again, that's the wormhole, I think. That's my take on it.
Real gravity, metaphorical scissors.
Yeah, and with that, we're going to cut away from this segment and we're going to wrap it up here. If anyone online listening would have any ideas for the gravity scissor, please leave it in the comment, both either on YouTube or on Spotify. And we would love to hear from you. Or if you have any inputs on this week's big question about trying to separate personal identity from work, we would love to hear that as well. It's a challenge that a lot of people deal with on a day-to-day basis, and it's quite a meta discussion. So as always, thank you everyone for listening to our show, and we would love to hear back from you guys next week. So thank you.
See you next time.
Yeah.